couple minutes, and I'd hope to have 5 minutes, but it's going to have to be a couple with the time pressure. What do you think of the most important thing we're going to do in the interim? What's your most important proposal? Then Chairman Northrup will take over chairing it. And we may or may not be able to take any audience testimony. The time is, they ambushed us. And I will say that one of the things that both of your chairmen think is that a major concentration during the interim, whatever the topics are, has got to be educating the committee on some of the issues and how some of the systems involved work. Because, you know, there's so many of us, myself included, that are new to this committee. So that has to be a major focus, because this is more than a little complicated.
And I'd just like to say there's a sheet that was handed out, or a summation that Ashley did, thank you, and kind of lists all of them, grouped them back up together pretty well. And so we'll be working from that later on just to get an idea of how everybody feels.
Okay. We'll go ahead and get started. We'll start down at this end with you, Ocean, and we'll come right around, and committee members, I'll try to my best on names and whatnot, but I can't see and hear as well as I might. And for those of you who are not familiar with this room, the acoustics are god awful, so speak close to the microphone and do be brief because we are on time pressure. Representative Andrews.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just walked in a little bit late, but I am giving my top priorities, correct?
Top priority, yep.
All right, thank
Speaking
you.
to the mic a little better.
Bring it to get closer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the number one thing I would like to talk about, even if it's just a little more education, is ESA programs, but also in dealing with public education. I think talking about ways to address the teacher shortage and thank you. Also, simplification and reduction of standards would both be good things to explore. Not seeing it on here, but I believe Representative Berger had submitted an idea about mental health care in a facility, and I thought that was something that would be good to talk about too. So sorry for the quick summary and being unprepared, but thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Allred, is it not?
As I look through these lists, my preference would be pre-K. I don't see it on this summary, but on page 10.
Yeah.
And then the student mental health on page 11. Those would be my two top priorities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think, things that we heard throughout this session, as well as looking through this list, my top three would be access and improvement to mental health for our students, pre-K literacy, and then some of the work supporting the work of RIDE and the State Board of Education, looking at improving the standards and making sure that work is being done and supported. Thank you.
Okay. Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think the things that we heard a lot about this year was pre-K, early childcare, and well-being. So talking about student well-being, I think it's also would be important for this committee to discuss teacher well-being as well. So what is it's not just pay that might be an issue for teachers, but also how are staff feeling and appreciated. That's what keeps them there, what drives them away. I think is an important discussion, and I think it goes well with our student well-being. And then looking at that standard, the standards issue, trying to find ways to kind of reduce those requirements so teachers can, as we've heard throughout this interim, teach instead of test. So those are the things that I'm most interested in working on.
Okay. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just echo on the K-3 stuff that I've been hounding on for the past couple of years, K-3 literacy. I submitted an interim topic on the Alaska Reads Act, which is also modeled after the Mississippi Model Act that was and has been so successful on K-3, has 4 components, really boils down to testing, preschool, educator prep, and district and statewide reading programs. And then beyond that, one of the other areas that I think we need to really look into, and I've spoken with the superintendent on this, is moving Part B over to the Department of Ed from the Department of Family Services for early childhood. So those would be my 2 key areas.
Okay. We're going to just proceed then, and Chairman Northrup and I will go back clean up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have my name on one of these, but I've talked to my chairman on that, the readability of statutes. I think that's a pretty good one to take up as an individual, so I'm not going to do that or try to push that here. What I'm interested in for this committee is community college funding, looking at the revenue streams there and also the ECA relative to community colleges. So that being a part of our broader look, I think community colleges should be part of our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I echo those that have talked about pre-K, and again, sometimes the definitions of these things we might have different understanding, but early childhood development in general, I think it includes the child care piece as well, but definitely strengthening our pre-K programs and preparing these kids to enter kindergarten in a more effective way. So I support all those. I also strongly support the looking into mental health from many different angles. And I just want to take a minute because I did put a topic down for mental health, but it has a specific emphasis that I really would like to see. And that is, I'd like to learn from the Department of Education. I'd like to learn at the same time from the Department of Health in the same room at the same time, and Department of Family Services to be together to have a discussion about how we interact together on that issue, what the redesign in the Department of Health means to this issue, and look at specifically how they function together on the state level, whether that could be improved with better lines of communication, better descriptions of how they work together, but even getting to the local level where we have such disparity in counties like mine with resources, and how do those departments work together at the local level to support children in the area, not only of mental health, but child protection and safety, and how we just do that better and just evaluate how we can do it better. And I'm specifically targeting the idea of partnerships at the local community level that are well-defined partnerships, and when there's disagreements among those entities in the local level, they have a place to appeal, and kids don't fall through the cracks because things are deadlocked. So that's my concerns. Thank you.
Berger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to say my number 1 would be also taking a look at the student mental health that's going on in our state and across the country. Continue what Representative Lawley just said. Also in there, we've heard a lot, again, the pre-K, where we're going to go with that pre-K. And something that, again, with the building of standards and what we're doing with standards, but also looking at alternative diplomas, graduation requirements for high schools, what different tracks can we provide for students and opportunities we can provide for those high school, all students. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. 9 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've put down as my top priority school safety and security. In 2017, we passed House Bill 194, sponsored by Representative Eklund at the time. We provided some incentives for school districts to allow staff to carry and work with local law enforcement in order to be able to protect our students. I believe there's a problem with funding there, that we're requiring those staff members to pay for their training. So I'd like to look at that, but I'd also like to work with our local law enforcement officers to develop some working relationships and some ways to keep our children safe while they're at school. And I think that's a really important issue for me. Secondly, the student literacy that you're talking about and early childhood reading, it's so important for kids to know how to read. That's an important thing for me. And then educational choice, as Representative Andrew had spoken about, I'm sure everyone's aware that we ran mayor bills this year, and in my district, that's a very important issue. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Linda Brennan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My top priorities would be school choice. That was a big one in my district. The other would be teachers hiring and retention, and looking maybe in that realm, also looking at how do we allow teachers to teach and kind of roll back some of the restrictions, give them a little bit more leeway in the classroom. And then mental health of students.
Okay, Senator Ruffin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, there are some good themes here, which is nice that they're coming together. Early childhood's been discussed, and I support that. Mental health, I wanted to weigh in specifically on and recognize that, in my view, that probably should be the highest priority. And I think a lot of the mental health concerns relate back to other topics. Reduction of standards is a great example of that. I don't know if reduction is the right term. I actually was thinking prioritization or categorization or something along those lines that's more appropriate. But we have done a lot over the last decade and longer that has improved the academic rigor, and a lot of that has been at the expense of the joy of learning in the classroom. A key to mental health, both for the teachers and for the students, is that joy of learning side. People need to be showing up and looking forward to it, and have the opportunity to inspire students and be inspired by the teachers. We've taken away from that. I think we've done that through, with the best of intentions, increase in rigor over time. So I think that ties a lot together, getting to the mental health, again, students and teachers for mental health, looking at our standards, but with the priority of returning the joy of education to the classroom. And I think if we focused on that joy of learning, we would achieve, honestly, a lot of the other solutions along the way. So my highest priority would be joy of learning.
Thank you. Senator Brightman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies for being a little late this morning. My priorities are kind of all under the same umbrella of empowering parents, Mr. Chairman. So I think it's important that parents have a voice in their child's education, and I think school choice and allowing the money to follow the student is very empowering for parents. Obviously, 95+% of the students in our state go to a public school, and that's great. That's probably what will continue to happen with school choice if the money were to follow the student. But for the few that it doesn't work for them, they need options too. Every child needs an option to flourish, and I think that we need to allow for that. And the next would be the parental rights and education bill that failed in the House. I think that's very important, that parental rights are upheld, especially in an education setting. And also, I want to take a look, maybe a 1-hour look at school board governance and the use or misuse of executive session. I think it would be a quick little run through for those of us that are new on the committee, and maybe a possibility of if there's a statutory change that needs to happen, we can do that. And also the corporal punishment bill, I would like to get that cleaned up the way we need it and get it out the door. And that would probably, again, Mr. Chairman, another hour or two on that. And I think we'd have a bill draft that we could all be happy with. So those are my priorities, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chairman Northrup, you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of my priorities, of course, is community college. And then I would like to also look at pre-K, increasing all the retention, getting kids that are in pre-K and keeping them in there some way, keep having more literacy. Also like to look at the student health. The mental health side of that world is another one of my priorities, so.
Okay. I will pitch the early literacy K through 3 reading. Did pass out a proposal to you, but included in with that were the rankings of the district's performance immediately before COVID and at the most recent. And I encourage you to look at that and look at how your district is doing. It's based on the YTOP test. And it's striking to me how much difference there is. We've got some districts that are doing very well and some districts that are not doing very well. And we were admonished in the last recalibration report by our consultant that overall our performance is not really adequate, and he was focusing on third grade reading because so much of the rest of academics depends on that. And essentially saying we're not getting our money's worth and we need to improve. So with that, Chairman Northrup, if you'll take the committee and use your judgment on what we can do with public testimony given the time, I compliment the members for being brief in their run through.
I agree, Chairman Scott. Did a great job. It's 8:45. We used 15 minutes of the hour to do that. So if we could take some quick public comment, and anybody would like to comment on any of the items that we talked about, please fill the chairs up so we can just, there's 3 chairs there or 4 chairs, fill them up. We'll run through it fairly quickly. Please try to be brief, be respectful of the people that also would like to talk. We're going to start out with Superintendent Degenfelder. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Megan Degenfelder, State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Thank you for the opportunity to address you all today. I've enjoyed working with all of you throughout this legislative session and look forward to this interim topic discussion and ways that we can collaborate in our shared priorities together over the interim. There's some tough decisions in narrowing down these interim topics today, and so I've only submitted one topic from the Department of Education titled Early Intervention and Education Program Funding. Early childhood is a topic that we've analyzed for years, but this interim, I want us to start with a background of a discussion that we can then narrow down to our focus on the child development centers and any financial or regulatory issues that we can help with. Entering the 2024 budget session, I hope that we can then bring to your colleagues some real impactful change that supports our CDCs. In addition to interim topics, I'd like to share some priorities with you that the WDE will continue to move forward, stemming from the many conversations that I have had over the course of the last year during the campaign. The first is parental empowerment and eliminating political bias. We will focus on curriculum transparency efforts, statewide guidance for library books, and ensuring that divisive and inappropriate concepts are not being taught. School choice is also parental empowerment, and the topic of school choice has been proposed to you today, and I support that discussion. The second is reducing bureaucracy, which we will achieve through data collection efficiencies and rethinking our regulatory functions. I'm dedicated to extensive regulatory reform in the education system so that our school districts can have greater flexibility and ability to innovate, and so that our teachers can focus on teaching. Third is increasing participation in career and technical education. This will include working to update the state's Perkins Plan, increasing participation in our career technical student organizations, and increasing workforce credentials for our Wyoming graduates. Fourth is improving literacy. The reading assessment and intervention statute should be reworked from the Band-Aid approach that we have come to over the years. We will work on consensus for the definition of literacy, screening and assessment instruments, K-3 ELA standards, and national best practices. Fifth is valuing and supporting teachers by continuing the work that we have currently ongoing with the Teacher Retention and Recruitment Task Force, as well as the apprenticeship program. This also includes evaluating our entire state system of support and the introduction of a principal leadership training component. It also includes continuing to work closely with the State Board of Education to make sure that we are prioritizing our state standards. Lastly, our fundamental supporting efforts, and these include civic and financial literacy education, mental health, which I support as an interim topic, and implementing the governor's RIDE report, as well as the State Board's profile of a graduate. With that, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me the time, and I look forward to working with you all during the interim. Would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Superintendent. Anybody have questions for the Superintendent? Thank you very much for your comments. Go ahead, Mr. Yen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman, members of the committees. I brought before you, before the body, 3 different bills this year, and they were really to pick at and work at this both childcare and pre-K issue. I really thank all of those who submitted the pre-K topic, and I think that is one that the committee is really up to the task for, and I look forward to seeing what they can do. I know that this is something that both has benefits long-term for the child, as well as the family. And I think that having a holistic viewpoint from an interim study is really the appropriate way to go about it to make sure that we have a Wyoming solution for Wyoming. And I look forward to seeing what topics show up on the list. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Mr. Yen? Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I got 3 things I want to touch on: hiring of teachers, reduction of standards, and reading and literacy. The first thing, hiring of teachers. I had a recent newspaper article about teachers leaving Wyoming last couple days, and I think it was the Casper paper. One of the things I've observed over the years is you all are on treadmills of studies, and you had yet another study this session. But one of the things that has struck me is we should be asking the question, what do teachers need to be successful? That is a technique I use as a commanding officer. I served 5 years, 2 different ships in the Navy, and I would ask my department heads, what do you need from me to be successful? And that really is absent in the presentations I've seen in front of the committees over the years. So I think we need to turn the microscope of studies around into binoculars, looking at what teachers might need in the classroom. You had a proposal, I believe it's in here, if I skimmed it right, about reducing standards for certification of teachers. At the end of the day, in this topic, if you look very carefully at the front of our classrooms, you'll find they are more blue collar than they are professional. And that's sad. But what happens is the more money you put into studies or administrators or those kind of things, the more blue collar you make the front of the classroom. And the more blue collar it becomes, the more susceptible you become to things like CRT or 1619 Project or those kind of things. Second thing, standards or reduction of standards. I know standards from the nuclear Navy. I got it. But the thing you need to recognize is when everything is required by a standard, nothing is required by standard. It's up to the teacher. And so reducing them and keeping them top level so teachers can employ the skills they learned in college and getting certified is a good thing. So I support that look at. Last, Chairman Scott has a thing about reading and literacy. And my thought on that is what you need to do is put IFs for reading and literacy into most schools. I got it, some schools are pretty small. I've visited the 4J school up there in Northeast Wyoming, and maybe you don't need a full-time IF. But the thing you really need to do to make that work is to make the funding for those IFs transparent to the district so that they are not somebody that is lopped off when there's a funding issue. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Winnie? Thank you. My brain blanked. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you for letting me speak,
Chairman, I think if I'm supposed to address you any other way, I'm so sorry. Okay. My name is Laura Doan. I've lived in Wyoming for about 4 years. When I moved here, I became a youth leader for Cheyenne Hills for about 2 years and worked directly with kids. I became a CASA advocate. I've had about 9 kids so far. I worked in the ER during the height of COVID. And if you don't know, we have a mental health part of the ER. It's not technically a psych ED, but we will sit on people until the adults went to BHS or kids went up to Casper or down to Denver. I also worked at Chugwater School last year with some of the SPED kids. And I'm a single mom. So I think just to give you this history to know, so you know, I think I'm pretty well-rounded when it comes to the kids and the needs and what I've seen firsthand. And also, I just want to thank all of you for bringing up the mental health issue because whether if we like it or not, or our opinions on it or not, it's a major issue. And yes, I saw sick COVID people. But what I saw mostly, and maybe because my eyes were drawn to it, were the kids that were coming in. There was an endless amount of kids, all ages, as young as 5 years old, that were suicidal or homicidal. And they opened up to me in the youth group and in the ER, because sometimes we have to sit on kids for days. They have to sit back there in the ER with no homework. They're not allowed to have any schoolwork, limited visitations, and they're sitting in front of a TV. And yes, they get fed, which is great, and get some social interaction, but not all the nurses are trained with mental health that are back there. So I'm just I'm very passionate about the mental health, but I don't think, talking about it is important, but then coming up with a plan. And I am a believer, and I don't want to force that on anybody, but the state still prays. I went to a prayer meeting last year here in town. It was great. So there are some biblical aspects we could pull out and apply to our kids. And it's not forcing religion on them, but there are tools, like a farmer prepares its field and an athlete prepares for a game. If we start telling athletes that, it stinks really bad if the person you're playing against is really competitive, that doesn't prepare them to win. And it's the same thing with our kids. They need coping skills. COVID brought out lack of coping skills. It brought to light physical and sexual abuse. The majority of the kids I've talked to have been sexually abused in one way or another, or it's happening at school. It changes your brain path. It changes the way you think. And so if we don't address these issues, that they're wanting to disassociate with their identity because something has happened. And if we ignore that, that's not loving. It's not kind. And I'm not here to try to tell anybody how to do their job. I have no idea what you guys really do. But I respect your jobs. I respect all the teachers. Just trying to share what I've experienced, so.
There we go. Mike wouldn't get on. Thank you very much for your comments. It was moving. Thank you. Go ahead, Erin.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. I'm Erin Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees, and you see that you have a few topics in here related to the community colleges. I wanted to extend an invitation to the committee. I know that you've really been working on educating the Education Committee, and for the last few years, we've working together with the Community College Commission and doing just that, really educating the committee on how the community colleges are funded, the sources of revenue, how the funding allocation model works, all the really fun, good stuff. But it's really important, I think, for folks to understand, because it is quite different from the model that I think a lot of people are familiar with K-12. And so we're happy to continue that effort to the extent and however structured the committee wishes. So I wanted to extend that invitation quickly. The top priority coming in from the community colleges is to continue that conversation about sustainable funding and what that looks like for the community colleges. There's been several years of of data and research that you can refer to, and that's referenced in the materials. But the ask of the committee would be to forward legislation that would allow us to amend the statute so the Community College Commission can make an ask officially in the biennial budget process for inflationary costs. So it is something that's of utmost importance to the process. It doesn't mean it's automatic in any way, but it allows the conversation. And so, Mr. Chairman, with that, I would be happy to answer any questions. And I know Dr. Caldwell is here to also just give you a little bit of perspective from the Community College Commission.
Go ahead, Dr. Caldwell.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Sandy Caldwell, Executive Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. I'm always happy to be here with you. Before I get started here, I did first want to say thank you for the bills that you did bring forward that did pass. So a deep appreciation from all of us in the community college family for that. And then I just wanted to also say that we would welcome any of these topics that are here. I mean, and I think they actually fit under one umbrella, frankly, with all of the topics that are in with the sustainable funding, looking at the service areas, as well as what differential tuition would look like. And I do think there is an opportunity, as you heard Ms. Taylor talk about, there was a bill you brought forward as a committee that didn't pass, but I actually do think there are ways to strengthen that up and to alleviate some of the concerns. There were valid concerns, frankly, that were expressed about the way it was written. Just as a reminder, we'd love that opportunity to go through the work of the sustainable funding that we did, talk about how that relates to the legislative, state interests, and community colleges. This is a commission priority. The Wyoming Community College Commission does establish priorities. They're required to do that by statute. And this fits within that, certainly. And it does also align with the statewide college system strategic plan, which you as a legislature require and have us make sure that that is updated and the data is presented along with the biennial budget. A few things I wanted to share is the commission will be undergoing its tuition workshop in June, where they do have a tuition policy and it is set to be updated. They will be discussing differential tuition. They will be looking at in district out of district service area and that process for if a county wanted to change it. So we welcome these topics. We'd love to continue this conversation. We are very grateful that we do have a home committee and the joint education committee, because we do get a chance to sit before you and talk about these topics in depth that are quite different from the K-12 and different from the university. So it lets us talk before you and consider how you as a committee want to bring that to the full body of the legislature. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but we look forward to the interim session this coming year.
Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Caldwell or Aaron? Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and senators and representatives. My name is Richard Lennox, and I'm a retired teacher. I had them pass out a handout. Please excuse the juvenile nature of it. It's the teacher in me to have a visual for you as I go through this. The things I've listened to and witnessed as I was in some of the committee meetings and watching the floor debate, I wanted just to kind of go over how you might be able to look at those through the interim, not necessarily a topic. If you see on that first page, there's a lot of things that the districts and site admin have to negotiate as they are preparing for the school year and as they're working through the year. And you guys added some in there, the mental health, the graduation requirements, school safety. Those could also be shown on that graphic as well. But one of the things that we hear a lot is the teachers have a lot on their plate. I was a teacher for 25 years, and what I can tell you with this graphic is, and it may upset the people behind me because they have to do all this work, but district personnel and the site leadership, they really can take all these topics and massage them and get them to a point where when they get down to the classroom level, it fits. So the teacher may, and it also depends on how that message gets down to the classroom. Is it coming down with a negative connotation? Is it coming down as this is positive for us? So when the teachers get some of these initiatives, some of these policies, they've been vetted, they've been kind of worked out through the system, and they do fit. The next page is kind of a possible elephant in the room. When we're thinking about the policies, in my opinion, there seems to be this nationwide discrepancy between a school choice push in our public school. And I want us to avoid kind of picking one over the other. I want us to look at policies that are going to be good for all students, no matter what environment they're sitting in. And some of the things that, again, this is not just this body, but it's nationwide. When people are talking about public school, they're looking to limit what's happening at a public school. They're looking to legislate, tell the teachers what they can and can't do. But when we start talking about charter schools and school choice, we're opening, the budget for them. We're opening, let's move in this direction. And I want us to look at it the same. I want us to say, is this good policy for student learning across the board, whether they're sitting in a home school, a charter school, a parochial school, or a public school? I want them to get good policy, good law to make that experience positive for all our students in Wyoming. I'll stand for any questions.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Questions for him? Thanks again. Go ahead, Shelley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shelley Duncan. I submitted a proposal, and it sounds like hopefully the majority of you want to do something with early childhood pre-K. I've been contracted by a company that has been solving this issue, so I'd love to have this as one of our topics so that I could give you some alternatives and some possibilities for Wyoming. Wyoming's considered a child care desert. What that means is defined as a subdivision or county with at least 50 children under the age of 5 that has no licensed child care providers or more than 3 times as many children as a licensed daycare slots. Number-wise, that is, there's a supply of 22,699 currently in Wyoming. The demand is 28,092 with a gap of 5,393. There have been several bills, but as we've heard earlier, that those have failed. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's programs out there. In Nevada, this program was implemented in 2022. Their goal was 50 new providers. In the first 6 months, they easily surpassed this with 86. Then this created 775 new childcare slots and had an economic impact of over $30 million a year in the first year. In 2023, they're going to help with 225 new providers and have an economic impact of estimated of $59 to $91 million annually. One of the things that we haven't discussed a lot is the goal of, besides the traditional care, but to have, especially after we heard with COVID and impact of the pandemic, is the need and necessity of 24-hour care to support our military families, bilingual infant care, outdoor play, and rural families. We need to reduce this gap by 50%. There's a proposal that we could reduce this gap by 50% in 3 years. And that would provide 117 new provider programs. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but it's a Wyoming solution. Another possible is to support and may include things like creating a child care marketplace, like a tri-share program between the state, the providers, employers, and technology platforms. So I would just like to close with, Wyoming was awarded a $3.3 million preschool development renewal grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in December of 2020. So the funding would support Wyoming to carry out these strategies and to develop the early childhood statewide strategic plan, follow in the key areas of family empowerment, knowledge, choice, connections, access. All these are things that we've been talking about here today. So I hope that that's something that we can look into further and maybe also have a little economic diversification with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Duncan? Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Nicole Hauser. I'm the Executive Director of Cathedral Home for Children in Albany County. Here today, though, as a member of the Wyoming Youth Service Association. We are in support of so many of you testifying about the need to address student mental health. So we look forward to those discussions in the interim and plan to work alongside you as we find some real solutions for our kids. While it wasn't mentioned when you guys went around the table, I would like to point out Chairman Northrup and Representative Brown brought forth two ideas, the same idea, and it is to help us identify and clarify institutional schools. So for Cathedral Home for Children, we have a school on our campus. We have 15 certified teachers. We are able to teach grades 6 through 12. And recently, there's been elimination in WDE rules, so we don't know where we stand. We're not a charter school, we're not a public school, we're not a private school, and now there's concern that we're no longer classified as an institutional school. So we are asking the committee to help us in the interim really clarify that, whether that's legislatively or by rule, to help us access different federal dollars, and more importantly, to ensure that the students who do really hard, important work in our school settings get credit for that. And when they go home, that they have their diplomas, their credits transfer. That's really critical. And I know that you guys would all want that for those students as well. So thank you. Stand for any questions.
Have any questions, anybody? Would you send me an email on that?
I sure will.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
It's in the list, I understand, but I like it electronically.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jamie Stein. I'm the Executive Director for Developmental Preschool and Daycare Center in Laramie, and I also oversee programs in Carbon County as well. I just want to say that I'm really encouraged by the amount of attention that is being paid to early childhood care and education at the state level. I have been actively involved in a lot of different committees over almost a decade, and this is the first time that I feel like there has been this much care paid attention to those programs. So I want to say thank you for that attention. I do want to say that as we move forward with these conversations, there are 46 CDC centers around this state that have been providing services to children, both children with disabilities and typically developing children, for decades. And we really are concerned about the ability of our programs to continue to provide those services. And we're really excited at the opportunity to be able to be involved with this conversation as we move through the interim. And I would stand for any questions.
Questions? Thank you very much. Good morning, Lachelle.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to briefly speak to you about the suggested interim topics that you're considering. I just wanted to mention that a lot of conversation is happening about the work of the RIDE Advisory Group that the governor started a year ago, and what's next. And so I appreciate the superintendent earlier mentioning that her strategic plan includes thinking about how to implement those recommendations. And many of those are topics today that you're considering. And I would just mention that mental health, once again, was one of the main priorities we heard across the state for both teachers and students. So I appreciate you considering taking a look at the capacity that already exists in our schools and communities, and then how do we best deliver those services to our students who are in need. And then secondly, when it comes to early childhood, as has been mentioned earlier today, the governor's office did apply for, along with the Department of Family Services, a preschool development grant that we have been working diligently on over the last 4+ years. And there's been a lot of work surrounding the governance and how we best align our services at the state level. And then this past year, we also took a look at the funding for early intervention services for both school districts and the child development centers, and that information will be available in a few weeks. So we're happy to come to the table and help the committee as they consider some of the policy changes for early childhood, as we've been working in this space for quite some time. And then I would just mention also thinking about how we move our system to a more student-centered learning, in thinking about how we allow students to reduce the burden that teachers in schools are feeling, perhaps with the standards and assessments, so that we can allow more flexibility for our schools to innovate, is certainly something that also was expressed across the state. So we look very forward to working with all of you, and thank you for your time this morning.
Question for Lachelle? Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Donna Sheen, and I am Director of the Wyoming Children's Law Center and also a member of the Wyoming Youth Justice Coalition. I want to first thank you for your work last interim on suspension and expulsion, and I'm hopeful that Senate File 48 is going to pass those last hurdles, and that the Department of Education is going to be providing guidance on the use of suspension and expulsion. And so as part of what we feel like is the next step, it would be to take a look at helping schools be able to provide evidence-based alternatives to the use of suspension and expulsion. And I feel that fits very nicely under the umbrella of children's mental health, which you seem all to be very interested in. And so I would just like to encourage you to include that idea under that topic. Some of the reasons are that we know the evidence is clear that the use of suspension and expulsion doesn't make schools safer, and they do not help children who are struggling and making those poor decisions. I loved hearing that you would like to see more involvement of all the departments, because many of the children who are frequently suspended and expelled are also children that the Department of Health and the Department of Family Services are trying very diligently to help. And so it undercuts all of those efforts when we aren't working together and recognizing that there needs to be evidence-based alternatives used for these children. Also, keep in mind that it really damages relationships with parents when school districts use suspension and expulsion. It's very difficult to bring youth back from that. They, think about anybody who's ostracized from a community, and especially at that age, when you're told you are not welcome, you never feel quite the same when you're told you have to go back. And so parents sense that and feel that protective nature. So I think for all of those reasons, I hope that you will include that as a subtopic under how to help children and improve their mental health. And I would stand for any questions.
Very good, thank you. Any questions? All right, we'll go to Brian, and we're running short on time because we need to do a summation here, so.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. We've already shared topics, suggestions, and thoughts with you, but did just want to make the offer during the course of your interim, any way that school boards, superintendents, school business managers, business officials, any way we can help you bring information to you. Just want you to know that we're happy to be your partners during the interim.
Well, we'll look forward to working with you. Thank you. All right, we'll cut off public testimony, and I'll turn it back to Chairman Scott and let you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I've been trying to put this together in summary form where we can take it to the Management Council, and we really have to be careful about not taking too many topics to them. So let me just run through a quick summary as I see it. The top two of interest seem to be mental health and early literacy. With the early literacy, there's a lot of interest in the pre-K, but we've also got a very good proposal from Representative Brown on looking at what's going on in the various teaching models and some models in other states. And we'll draw on all these from the proposals that were in the thing, looking for specific bullet points. But we're going to be a little economical in that, dealing with the management council. It's safer. You can get them picking you apart. But those would be the top two. Special ed would be a relevant part of both of those, and we have a number of proposals in the special ed area. And we need to look at, in both of them, the relative, what contribution standards are making particularly important in the early literacy and mental health, and looking at the funding in the model in both of those. So that'll give us a good look, Mr. Chairman, at the model. There was some interest in retention of teachers, and I would broaden that to teachers and other professionals. We'll be forced to look at that in the context of the external cost adjustment. We'll have a meeting probably jointly with appropriations in the fall, and that'll be the context where we can look at that, and preparing for that, we'll look at that set of issues. Community college funding and governance, been mentioned several times. That needs to be a topic where we need to get more education. And I would suggest that in addition to just funding and governance, we need to look at responsiveness to needs from the community and from the business community for trained personnel in that one. And then I want to throw out two more. One is Chairman Northrup gave us a very creative proposal in taking a look at the School Facilities Commission from the outside. And I would urge the committee to adopt that. We may not get that one by Management Council, but I think especially where the funding is starting to be a major issue, we need to have a hard look at that. And I would draw heavily on his proposal in drawing up submission to Management Council. And then finally, in the school choice area, we talked last year about what the legal constraints were, the constitutional constraints. I think it's too soon to repeat that, but I would like to have that something we have at least at one of the meetings, an open forum for proposals from the public. And I would also look, we've passed again a charter school bill this year. I think it's going to become law. And there may be technical corrections, and I want Warren to bring a bill if we need to do that sort of thing, Mr. Chairman. So that's my suggestions, is how to summarize it, and how do you want to handle committee reactions, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, that's what I was going to ask you too, is you've heard the summation. So committees, what do you feel? How's the feelings of the committee? Thumbs up. Thumbs up. Anybody have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I have two.
Okay. All right.
My experience in dealing with the Management Council is broad topics and not too much
Correct.
detail. Let us fill that in. You've given us a lot of material to draw on. So.
All right. I think we've got our marching orders. We'll get something put together. Anything from LSO? Did we miss anything? Thank you. With that, I'd like to thank the public. You guys did a great job in keeping your comments short. You got to the point. Thank you very much.
And thank the
We're
committee the
adjourned.
same way.
Yep.